Welcome to part two of our developer interview with tabletop designer Alex White. For this part, we're focusing more on tabletop design as well as the logistics and challenges of producing physical goods. And with that, here's the podcast already in progress. Now, before we kind of switch gears and talk about kind of like the logistics or the production side of a tabletop game, I guess I have one final question for you from a design standpoint, and I'll see if there's anything else that comes to your mind. So, we've been talking a lot about kind of that balance between, the historical side or kind of being inspired by history and making a game itself. And you kind of mentioned this with Tail and Charlie about first being inspired by the historical side and then building the game around it. So, I wanted to ask from a design standpoint, how do you marry the two? Making, again, like a tabletop experience and the historical story or the historical event that you want to, explain or show off to people?
Yeah, it's a good question. For myself, I start from where I am at the moment, or start from where I have been. I've written a number of games using what I call a retrospective system, where you're using playing cards and you're looking back at things that have happened. Last year I published The Long Road Home, which was inspired by the four hobbits on the way back to the Shire after everything had happened. Sauron's defeated, they're on the way back, they're remembering their journey, remembering getting to Rivendell, remembering Gandalf falling in Moria, remembering where they split. And so it's using a very similar mechanism to the one that I did for Cool and Only Courage, but made it for a group rather than for individuals. And I'm working at the moment on the Road to Utopia post-apocalyptic version. And I'm thinking, well, I can make this exactly like The Long Road Home, but with a post-apocalyptic kind of covering for it. But I might want to do something a bit different because the post-apocalyptic survival things rely a lot upon resource management. Food and ammunition and tools are scarce, and they inform what you do. So maybe I actually want to do a game where these come to the fore. At the moment, I've got a little sketchbook at home where I'm jotting down ideas and thinking, okay, how do I do this? If I do it this way, maybe this would work. But then what's the knock-on effect there? So I'll have a lot of thought experiments about how I might want to make mechanics link together, and I pull in existing ones I've used in the past and then say, okay, how can I bring in new ones here, either a new subsystem or add a different flavor to an existing thing. So so this is the next game I'm doing, and that is very much the active trying to work out how these things work at the moment. I'm still very much weighing up. Do I make it? Yes. Do I give myself a simple job and make it like The Long Road Home, or do I give myself a much harder job and try and make it something that might be actually a little bit more in line with that post-apocalyptic genre? So I'm leaning towards that second choice at the moment, if I'm honest.
Yeah. And
the other thing I do is I look at, because I like looking at a whole range of other people's games and seeing if there's mechanisms that other people have come up with which are really neat. Another one of the games which is kind of more on the back burner at the moment is inspired by Babylon 5. There's a kind of diplomats in space while big empires are grinding against one another. And I really like the dice system that was introduced for Blades in the Dark. And there's a kind of Forged in the Dark is games built using that mechanism, and there's a couple of dozen now. But the mechanism will work really nicely for that kind of diplomatic negotiating risk kind of game that I want to do. So yeah, I do keep an eye out for other mechanics where I think, yeah, that's really good. I think I could do something with that one.
And with, I guess, as you were just saying, like building like a game as like post-apocalyptic standpoint versus more of a historical standpoint. As you said, it's like kind of like your background, like trying to bring like more like historian. Wow, my mouth is drying up
Hmm.
there. Aspect to these games, like when you're working outside of history, like does like your approach or your process change at all?
Um, there's a lot of similarities in the approach because the step number one really is research.
Mhm.
So in the post-apocalyptic scenario, I'm not looking at historical documents because it's all made up. But I'm thinking, okay, what zombie films and books and TV series have there been? What alien invasion ones have there been? What nuclear holocausts have there been? Environmental disasters. So I kind of made a list of books I want to, and then get them out of the library, read through them, to work out what consistent story beats there are in these kind of stories. Um, what's what's unique about the robot uprising versus the zombie plague, and what things are similar. Um, and as you look across them, I see there's two dimensions. One is the apocalypse dimension, which is different for zombies and aliens, whatever, and the other is how are humans responding to it, and humans and cultists and gangs and things. Um, and so that's a consistent kind of threat that crops up across all of the post-apocalyptic scenarios. So I don't have a worry about authenticity because if I'm dealing with a historical thing with real people, I want to be honest to the experiences of real people. For a game which is fantasy or science fiction or post-apocalyptic, it's okay. What does the genre do? What are the kind of different dimensions there? Because I'd like to reflect the way that those games that people expect those things to go, with perhaps my own little wrinkle thrown in here and there. But the broad brushstrokes, people have a couple of ideas about if there's a zombie plague, it's going to be kind of a bit like this, a bit like 28 Days Later, or a bit like Day of the Dead, or a bit like The Walking Dead, um, or indeed The Last of Us, which is kind of man of the moment at the moment. And that research is a lot of fun, whether it's historical research and you're reading about real people who are absolutely amazing beyond belief, or reading stories, watching films to get a feel for how you want to reflect something in a game. Yeah, I enjoy that too.
All right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else from a design standpoint. As I said, I do want to talk a little bit more about the production side in a minute, but
Mm.
from your own perspective or from your own standpoint, anything else from a design point of view that we didn't touch on, or anything, or any other topics that come to mind that you would like to discuss before we kind of switch to our final section?
Just to say this, people often say this in writing. It's really important to be able to kill your darlings. There'll be stuff that you've written which is lovely and wonderful, and you have to say, is this actually going to make the game better? Who's going to care about this? I've had whole encumbrance systems and monetary exchange systems and fancy subsystems for repairing equipment, which I've stripped out. I said, be honest, when will somebody use this? When will they want to use this in game and say, thank goodness we had rules for this here? Answer, never. So it was clever, it was elegant, and it had to go. I count words deleted as same as words written with my editing. So if I've deleted 3,000 words, that's a productive day, even if it wounds my heart a little.
Yep. I mean, there are very much important lessons to that with the digital games as well. With does the consumer does this actually help your game? Because I've seen developers fall into
Yeah.
that trap of I'm just going to keep adding more and more and more to it. What if we throw in this full weapon customization? What if we throw in what if I spend the next
Mm,
6 months doing this, this, and this? And it's very much I think a change in how game development has really shifted. Like we talk about
right.
a lot in developers I've interviewed in like the 2010s, maybe 2015, it was very much this all or nothing approach. I want every single idea in my game, even if it takes,
Yeah.
5, 8, 10 years of development. Today, I think a lot of indie developers have really switched to, I want to get this game out, as fast as I can. And there's some people I think who will see that as, you're cutting corners, you're cheapening the experience. But like from a video game standpoint, I think it's only better if you can make an amazing 3 to 5 hour long game versus just an average 10 to 20 hour game. The 3 to 5 hour one is only going to be better for the consumer. They're going to walk away from that game far happier, and they'll be more willing to, check out what you do next.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it makes a lot of sense. In a way, that segues onto the kind of production side I want to talk about, because I imagine that for indie video game designers, it is a lot easier to kind of get something to market now than it would have been 15, 20 years ago. Most games are done by big studios. Certainly in the tabletop world, it's so much easier for a bloke in a room in a house to actually get something out in front of people and publish a successful game than it ever used to be. And a large part of that is down to crowdfunding, whether it's Kickstarter or GameFound or one of the other ones that's cropping up now.
And I think that's our good segue point. That the production side is definitely part of it that I really have no background or development point of view from. But I've interviewed a lot of tabletop developers. I've interviewed developers who do physical goods for their games. And the production side is its own unique aspect, its own unique nightmare, depending upon how you approach things. And as someone who's been doing this now for decades, has the actual production side of your games, has that changed or shifted at all over the years?
I think that the crowdfunding is really valuable because it lets you know if there's a market for a thing. If you attempt to do crowdfunding for a game and you don't meet your target goal, then that's quite good news because it tells you that people aren't interested in this. I think it behooves people to play the game properly. Don't put on an artificially low target so you can say, woohoo, I funded, but it's not enough you need. The production side of things, digital printing is so good now. 20 years ago, you needed to have a print run of at least 1,000 or 2,000 to even happen. Whereas now, short print runs of high quality is actually very affordable. And there's a range of printers who can do things for short print runs of kind of my scale. Larger print runs, people tend to go out to, from America, they tend to go out to China. Britain, they tend to go out to Eastern Europe.
Okay.
And this is some of the recent kind of political tariff kind of related things has kind of really worried some big game designers, especially because I think this actually might just break the economics of our game. But setting that one side for the moment, you work out the economics of how much it's going to cost to print and to package and deliver. You work out what cut the crowdfunder is going to take. We're going to work out how much you need to spend on art and editing, layout, and so on, and a budget for these, and then look at the different reward levels you're going to produce, and say for each of these reward levels, how much of the amount people pledge is going to contribute towards your eventual total. Because if you thought, oh, I need to raise £2,000 for editing and art and layout, you have your Kickstarter goal of £2,000. By the time you've taken off the fees and the cost of printing and the cost of delivery, suddenly you've only got £800 for your £2,000 worth of editing and art and layout. That'd be bad. So it's sensible to kind of to do the maths first to work out what a reasonable target is going to be. And if you meet that target, that's great, because you know that there is an audience out there for you. It also means if you come out to do a second or third game, there's people who have backed you in the past, and so they might say, actually, I like their stuff. I'm going to get a bit more of that. So that kind of, I'd say that's the kind of the first layer, really helpful. The second thing about production is how do you get it into shops? Because ideally, once it's produced, all the hard work is done, and that's building relationships with hobby shops or with distributors who can get into hobby shops, who then hopefully will take some of your games and then take them further on, and so they might have a life into that wider world beyond what you can do by selling yourself just online.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And as you're describing like that, the logistics side of this, that is something that, again, like, if you're not familiar with physical goods and physical production, it can easily like ruin your game. And the example you said about lowballing your Kickstarter, your crowdfunding rewards, I've seen developers do that in the past, and 9 times out of 10, it does not end well for that game.
No, because if it's funds, then you're kind of on the hook for delivering a thing. You've not got the money to deliver it. So that's kind of rough.
Yep.
And not a situation you'd want to get into. The other thing that personally, I like to go to Kickstarter when I've got the game is 90% done, because I can be fairly certain that I'm going to hit my delivery date. My delivery date for Tail End Charlie was June this year, and things are going to go out to backers in May. So I'm going to get in just before that. There are games that I've backed on Kickstarter. There's one game which hasn't come out, and it's been 8 years now. I've kind of mentally I've written that one off. Will it make people less likely to back other games by that person? I don't know. It makes me less likely to back other games. But I hope that by managing to hit my targets well, it encourages people that this is something that I am taking on doing professionally, and my word can be trusted on it. So, I mean, I'm a very small fish. No two ways about it. But even so, you want to do the right thing in the right way. And there's the web-based world, distribution, the print people and so on. Everything's so much better set up to enable things now than it used to be. Itch.io, which I know a lot of indie game developers, video game developers use for distributing games. I use that to distribute my tabletop role-playing games, as many other people do. And then there's bundles there where somebody might contribute and they'll get a lot of games. And over half of my game sales on Itch are via bundles, which is rather great because it's good value for the people getting them. And it also works out for me in terms of making some sales. You have game jams and other things like that, which are really nice ways to have a go at something slightly outside your normal comfort zone.
Yep. And to like the point of kind of, I guess, like that challenge of trying to like get this game out there, or trying to get like once it's out, once it's done, getting it to other people. One of the major things I've spoken to developers about in the past is fulfillment. Like, as you said, like, you're more on the small fish side rather than a major studio. How do you handle fulfillment? Do you go with a third party, or do you handle it yourself?
So this is something which I'm just dabbling into the waters now of going with a third party to help with fulfillment. I've found a UK-based distributor who's going to be taking on some of my games and then selling them into shops. If they go well, there'll be repeat orders through there. Indie Press Revolution is a distributor over in America. And as well as being a distributor, they also go along to conventions. There's many conventions. And so they take your games along there and sell them, and they sell them into shops in over there too. So finding good distributors and persuading them to take you on, really helpful. There's a couple of London game shops who I sent my catalogue to, and they said, yeah, I'll take 5 of those and 5 of those. So that's great. So I've sent them off to them individually. So the whole process of getting things going into shops and going via distributors is a new field for me. Just kind of finding my way, but happily there are communities of like-minded individuals. There is a Discord community for Tabletop Network, and people give each other advice and help about here's a distributor I went with, or these printers, actually they're really good value, recommend these. And so there's a network of other people where we're all working in the same area and then helping each other out with advice. That makes it really much less lonely than it was even, say, 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And I was about to ask that in terms of the crowdfunding side and like how much things have changed in that respect. I guess has like from my standpoint, like from like the digital side, like crowdfunding has been like it seems like from here like has really aided the tabletop industry. I like there's been like many different articles, and I've seen like tabletop games and board games just hit it tremendously out of the park with crowdfunding. And again, with your background doing this for so long, I think I know the answer to this, but how much like has crowdfunding been an overall like net positive or net negative for the tabletop industry?
I would have to say it's been a net positive. It's there's some bigger companies, and they'll go on there and they'll raise hundreds of thousands of pounds, which is good for them because it works for them as a business. I'm particularly interested in the smaller 1 or 2 person people like me, and I might raise £2,000 or £4,000, which is what I need in order to produce a game that I believe in and that I think people will enjoy. And without crowdfunding, you'd have to kind of somehow front that money up yourself and get it printed and then try and get it into people's hands. Because crowdfunding is both a marketing tool as well as a fundraising tool, to be honest, because it's a place which gets the word out about something. It gives a focus. People can point to and say, this thing over here, he's come and back me. So I think that Kickstarter really opened the door for a reduced risk of attempting to get games out. I've seen some games on Kickstarter which look quite interesting. They've not funded, and that's probably helpful for them that they haven't. It means they can come back and build more of an audience first. Ideally, if at the time when you actually start your Kickstarter campaign, you ought to know that you've got about half the people who might back you interested anyway. So there's all the avenues by which you can build audiences, such as podcasts and YouTube and things like that. None of which I do myself at the moment. I'm happy to be guests on fine transmissions such as this one. There's these avenues that make it just so much more possible. I think that there's a renaissance for creativity, and that's both in the digital and in the tabletop world. It's a great time to be a creator, I have to say.
And what you just said about having like that the marketing or your fan base before you go to Kickstarter, that has been again like another death nail for a lot of smaller Kickstarter projects. And it kind of goes like I'm sure this is something that is both tabletop and digital related, that there are designers who they try to kind of just like appear one day for the success. And
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, that just does not work. You need to be letting people know about who you are, what your game is. And I
Yeah.
guess that's an interesting question for you. Like, when I talk, like, normally when I do like Kickstarter or crowdfunding topics, of course, I talk to a lot of
Mm.
digital developers. And for that particular standpoint, usually the agreed upon kind of time span is you want to have at least maybe like 6 months to a year pre Kickstarter to kind
Yeah.
of, get people interested, get the word out, and then you go to Kickstarter. From the
Yeah.
tabletop standpoint, is that like a similar time frame or is it different?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say that's pretty much a similar kind of timescale. Um, and for me, it's generally speaking, there's about a year between having an idea and getting started, and then designing, developing, playtesting, and then doing a Kickstarter. And all along the way, you're engaging with people, looking for playtesters, talking about what you're doing, getting the news out there about it, so people think, "Oh, that sounds a bit interesting." I know some games who've had a 2 year run up to things,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, which seems to work very well for them. Um, yeah, I think that uh, about a year's worth of kind of work and pre-work leading up to the point where they launch Kickstarter does seem to be fairly typical in the tabletop world.
Mm-hmm. And uh, to kind of grow or to add on to that, in
Mm.
terms of, I guess, like the idea of stretch goals. Like, again, this is something that, from a digital standpoint, the sky is
Mm.
obviously the limit. I've seen games that have had like 2 to 3 pages worth of stretch goals, and we're going to do
Yeah.
every single idea. We're going to have full voice acting, full cinematics. We'll add another game on top of our game. Now, obviously, from a tabletop standpoint, again, building a game that is meant to be, physically produced, there's obviously a very big difference in terms of what else you can add on.
Yeah.
So, like, for your games, like, do you offer like stretch goals or like anything along those lines? And if so, like,
I
what's like that
yeah.
approach from you?
I tend to not do stretch goals um, because by definition they're things which I've not done yet.
Mm-hmm.
In my first game, I did a stretch goal, and it killed me getting it out because this is a book of 6 adventures, all adventures which I run at conventions, but getting into book form and format and edited, oh gosh, that was more stress than I needed. Um, where I see things work well are for games which have got scenarios and they have guest writers who've agreed to write scenarios at different stretch goals. That can work well. Um, I will sometimes have a stretch goal for, I think, yeah, I did have a stretch goal for Taylor and Charlie. If I reach a certain level, I produce an EPUB version as well as a PDF. EPUB is more work to do, but it's great for accessibility for people who use Kindles. And so I thought, well, if I can get to a certain level, then I'd like to include that. Um, Sometimes I've seen stretch goals uh, which have been surprisingly expensive for people. Books are VAT free. If you include stretch goals which are not books,
Mm-hmm.
then suddenly there might be additional taxes, additional import duties if things are being sent overseas,
Mm-hmm.
whole bunch of things which someone says, "Oh, I'll just have a stretch goal about this," and then suddenly you've got a world of pain that you could have avoided. Um,
Um, I did like some basic like international shipment. I was like sending some gifts out to fans, and that was just like a small end of some of like the nightmares when it comes to shipping
yeah,
things internationally. And so I cannot begin to imagine when you get to like mid to large scale operations in that respect.
yeah, yeah. I if uh, I would like to have in the future. I could see a game where I do have some stretch goals. When I do a larger game again, moving away from sort of the 50 to 80 page to more the kind of 200 or 300 page game. The Diplomats in Space one will be more of that kind of size, and that's something where I would think more serious about whether I wanted to have stretch goals to engage other designers that I know to get them to do little bits of work for me for it. But most of my games at the moment are small enough that there aren't any sensible stretch goals for me to have.
All right.
Plus, I'm risk averse. So.
Right. I guess one question I want to ask you before I kind of begin to start to wrap things up. Again, with your background in tabletop and doing this for so long, for any developers who are listening to us right now, who are in the tabletop space, do you have any tips for them in terms of the production side, the pre-planning side, that respect when it comes to a Kickstarter or crowdfunding?
For crowdfunding, there's a board game designer, Stegemeyer, who wrote something like 100 or more blog posts about effective Kickstarters, which was super important for me. And whenever I come across anybody who is interested in kickstarting things, I send them a link to that, because there's so much really good stuff that's been produced and set out that people use, and I recommend that to anybody. He's a board game designer. It was just as applicable to myself with the tabletop role playing. I imagine a vast amount of it would be applicable to digital designers as well. I could send you a link to that later if that would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I'll make sure to include that in the notes down below.
Yeah, and I think for Kickstarters, we talked about it earlier, but doing the maths well to work out what your goal ought to be, I think is really quite important. And it's easy to accidentally underestimate the amount that you want to do. I wrote a couple of blog posts about it because I thought this was helpful. I found somebody from the record industry that talked about the importance of working out their Kickstarter funding well. Again, extremely well done. It made it crystal clear that it's not as simple as my target needs to be the same amount as I want to pay my editors and layout artists or whatever. So I think those are the two things. One is look for advice on how to do Kickstarter well, and there's some really good stuff out there, and be clear-eyed about working out how much money you need to raise to do a thing. I think those are the two really key bits, I'd say. And as you've already said, build an audience before you launch your Kickstarter, not after you launch it.
So with that, to begin to wrap things up for our cast. So as we said, Tail and Charlie is your the latest game that you've put out. So I saw that you did an update, again, we're recording this at the end of April. Your last update on the Kickstarter was April 15th. So is the game currently out, or is it still in kind of production?
So this was my print proof that came through on Monday. Went through it, found one little glitch, which I fixed, and then sent it off for printing, and it should be delivered to me next Tuesday. And so from next Tuesday, I'll be sending it out to the backers. Then once it's out to the backers, I'll be making it available for sale on other sites. But always make sure the backers get things first. Nobody wants to see something in the shop before they've got their backer copy.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, you mentioned this earlier about having a third party for doing fulfillment. One other question that's popping in my head, that again is that difference between digital and tabletop, is getting into stores. You mentioned this earlier about kind of that challenge. For today, as my voice keeps dying on me, for tabletop developers, is there a general process, or does it differ from store to store in terms of trying to get your game in that respect there?
So happily, I was able to go to a seminar that was run
Mm-hmm.
after a UK convention last December, with two representatives from gaming stores. They were explaining the process of getting things into their stores. Um, you can get things into the stores directly, which worked well. But for them, it's often easier if you go via a distributor,
Mm-hmm.
because the distributor, they then just go make one call to the distributor and say, "Yeah, we'd like more of all of these things." You make less money out of it if it goes via a distributor because they need to take their cut for it. But from what I understand, it improves your chance of getting repeat orders into shops. Because if you're an individual they have to contact, you might not manage that. Might get overlooked. So uh, getting into stores directly is certainly a very practical thing to do. But going via getting into a distributor's hands is uh, gives a much more reliable channel into sales, and so that's why it is really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And like I work with a publisher for my design books, and I can certainly attest to that in terms of getting your name into like Amazon or Barnes and Noble versus just being yourself and trying to contact them.
Yeah, yeah, no, very much so.
All right. So, with that said, I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask you. This is something I ask a lot of digital developers, so I'm sure it's going to be as nerve wracking for you. Have you given thought to like your next project after a Tailend is like out and all finished?
I have 4 projects on the go at the moment in different stages of development. Um, I've mentioned the doing research for one on the suffragettes,
Mm-hmm.
because voting is so important. Why do so few people vote? You look at what some of these women went through in order to win the vote. You've got people who don't want to vote. And so if I have a game that actually kind of captures that, I'd love that. Research happening on there. Go to Utopia on rules mechanics, working on that. Born to the Purple, kind of bigger space diplomat game. That's kind of bubbling along in the background, and I need to get back to that, but I keep on getting distracted by other ones. And there's a game called Road to Romance I'm doing, which is a card game which lets people tell compelling romantic stories, because there's an area which is very underserved, and I think I've got something that can actually work quite well. I've had a lot of fun with it in various playtests that have gone on. So um, getting that into the hands of the right people, that's still working out how to do that. So that's going to be a 2026 thing, I reckon.
All right. And that actually takes me to that is probably one of the questions I want to ask you in terms of the timeline for producing and releasing a tabletop game. Again, I can talk about things from a digital standpoint.
Mhm.
For like your tabletop projects, do you have like an average time span from first conception of it to in someone's hands?
Yeah, it's for most of my games, which are kind of this size, it's about 18 months from conception to getting into people's hands. Tail End Charlie is unusual. That'll be 5 months from conception to getting into people's hands. But being a solo game, it's a bit easier to play test. Um, uh, the bigger games like Stargate up there, yeah, if it's 200 or 300 pages, that's about a 4 year from inspiration to getting into people's hands, I reckon.
All right. So with that, any final points, any final thoughts before we kind of say goodnight?
Um, just to reiterate something I said earlier, it's a fantastic time to be a creator. And if somebody watching this thought, I don't know, it sounds like interesting, but I don't think I could do it, you probably can do it. I would encourage you to have a go, because if we've got ideas, there are people out there who are interested in those ideas. The mechanisms to find those people far better now than they've ever been before. So Yeah. Done with your ideas. Bring them to life.
All right. So, if people want to follow you or check out your projects, do you have any websites, social media, stuff like that you would like to promote?
Yeah, sure. My website is plainsailinggames.com. And I review games and I review software that I'm using there, and blog about my process for developing games and about things I think are interesting, like probability or Kickstarter funding. So there's that, and I'm very active on Blue Sky. My Blue Sky handle is Plain Sailing Games.
All right. Fantastic. And be sure, feel free to send over those links you had, like to like guidance for like Kickstarter or anything else that comes to mind. And I'll be sure to include them for people to give a check out down below. All right.
Very pleased to do so.
Well, Alex, it has been a pleasure hanging with you. My evening, it's probably a bit later for you right now, but yeah, best of luck with the or getting the final version of Tail and Charlie out. And yeah, if you're free to chat in the future about tabletop design, I'll be happy to have you back on.
Thanks very much. I'd be delighted to come back again.
All right. So, for those of you watching, we're going to end things here for this week's episode. If you're new to the YouTubing stuff, check out all my books. As I said at the start, if you are a developer or you are on like any aspect of game dev or tabletop development and like to come on and chat about the process, please reach out. Again, Alex, best of luck with things, and hopefully we'll chat again in the future.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
With that said, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Come back for discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you send the art and science of games. Until our next chat, have a great night.